Hey there, and welcome to Weeb Novel Audiobook, your hub for epic fanfics, original stories, and thrilling adventures brought to life. Make sure to subscribe for regular updates and swing by my Patreon for early access and exclusive mature content. Now, sit back and enjoy the journey.
Chapter 19, Chapter 19, Curious Dragons 123 AC, Dragonstone. Rena quietly left her room, with Solaris perched on her shoulders. She had gotten used to sneaking out, but she had to admit that the guards being overwhelmed by the visiting royal family helped a lot. Her father had been on edge ever since Princess Rhaenyra flew to meet with the king, and the visit had been a surprise to everyone, and the entire castle scrambled around, trying to prepare for the king's arrival. Thankfully, her father had been oddly subdued, even if Rena could recognize that he was angry. She liked to think that Solaris' hatching had something to do with his better mood. He had made the effort to spend more time with her and even taught her tricks on how to deal with her dragon. It was everything she had ever wanted, but it felt so empty. Lord Harry had been right. It wasn't nice to know that her father only cared because of her dragon. She had always wondered what she had done wrong, why he looked at Bela with pride and at her with something colder, more distant. She had thought, foolishly, that maybe if she tried harder, spoke softer, obeyed quicker, he might see her. Really see her. But all it took was Solaris. She knew that her father loved her, but why couldn't he have shown it before? She couldn't help but feel bitter regarding the entire affair. He even spent most of the evening drinking wine and was angry at his wife and brother. Speaking of the royal family, the king had disappeared after a while at the feast and had retreated very quickly. The queen had also gone somewhere until Rena's grandparents arrived. Helena had spent most of the time with her babes, while Aegon had gotten drunk and disappeared, likely to a brothel somewhere. Thankfully, Aemond hadn't come. Rena didn't think she could see her mother's dragon at the hands of that boy, and she didn't think that he would be happy to see any of them again, not after what happened in the Driftmark. Nevertheless, the king had come from King's Landing so abruptly, and Rhianna knew exactly why he did that. It only took a look at the man, seeing the sickness miraculously gone, and him looking even younger than she remembered, to realize that Lord Harry was responsible for that. People could call it a miracle all they wanted, but she had seen Lord Harry's magic, seen him call lightning from the sky, fight off spirits of wind and fire, seen him create a storm of molten stone as they had discovered the giant dragon egg. She could see him or Lady Daphne healing the king, and why he would come all this way to speak with them, but they spent most of the feast with her and the rest of the children, instead of the king. It also didn't explain why, after a small conversation with him, both the king and queen had all but stayed away from the feast completely. Rena couldn't help but wonder what he had told them. Did they know about his magic? She did hear Queen Alicent call him a sorcerer, but she spoke it like it was an insult, which Rena didn't like. Even her grandparents had all but disappeared after the king summoned them. She had missed them greatly, but she hadn't spent much time at the Driftmark. The worst of it was the fact that the Potters hadn't talked to her like they had after her adventure. They were there during the feast, but they were talking to everyone. Rena thought that she was special, that they cared. No, this wasn't the time for sad thoughts. She would have her answers when she arrived at the manse. Solaris seemed to feel her sadness and licked her cheek. Rena chuckled and decided to continue her walk. She arrived in front of the familiar structure, only to hesitate slightly before knocking. Would she be welcomed here again? The Potters had been kind to her, they had given her Solaris and saved her life, but that kindness didn't seem reserved for Rena, something that she disliked for some reason. As if it made the decision for her, the door opened on its own, and Rena gulped as she walked forward. The moment she stepped across the threshold, she heard something, a sound, or perhaps a song. Did they have musicians inside somehow? Despite herself, Rena followed the music. It was different to anything she had heard before. It didn't sound like anything she'd heard in King's Landing or on Driftmark. It wasn't the music of harps or flutes, or even the lively lutes the minstrels liked to strum during feasts. No, this was something else. It was deeper, slower, like it came from a place of aching. Rena didn't even realize she was moving until the manse lit the way for her, torches flickering to life one by one. Solaris clung tightly to her shoulders but didn't make a sound. When she turned the corner to the main hall, she froze. There they were. Lord Harry and Lady Daphne stood in the middle of the room, bathed in candlelight and soft shadows, their bodies swaying gently in a slow, graceful dance. No words were spoken between them. There was no audience, no performance. Just the two of them, moving as if they had done this 1,000 times before. The woman's head rested lightly on her husband's shoulder, and his hand held her waist with a reverence that made something in Rena's chest twist. She felt like an intruder. Like she had stumbled into something too private, too real. Rena motioned to leave, only for Lord Harry's voice to stop her. "What do you think of the music? Chopin has always been a favorite of mine. Very few people have the command of music he has, a way to describe the world with just sounds. I wish I could have met him before he died, and yet I am grateful for it. There's no need for the illusion to shatter, huh?" The young girl didn't know what to say in response and just blurted out, "I'm sorry for interrupting. I didn't mean to come. If we did not wish to be disturbed, then the manse door would have remained closed. We've been waiting for you, young Rena." Something bloomed in her chest, but she stopped herself from feeling hopeful. "You have? Well, of course. You're a wonderful young girl. Why wouldn't we want to see you? You spent more time with the other children during the feast," she complained despite herself. She wished to take back what she had just said, only for Lady Daphne to kneel down and give her a hug. "Oh, you poor thing." When the hug ended, the man knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "This was just politics, my dear. Certain appearances have to be maintained to give a pretense of neutrality. I don't understand." The golden-haired lady rolled her eyes at her husband. "What Harry is saying is that if we show in public that we like to spend time with you, then everyone would think that we support Rhaenyra's bid for the throne. Isn't the princess the heiress? Why wouldn't you support her?" Rena asked. "In a perfect world, she would be, and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, as you probably noticed, things are pretty tense. We didn't want to be bothered by the politics of a place that isn't even our home, so we have to pretend not to care, or at least, not see the division in the court. If you wish to stay away, then saving the king's life isn't a good way to remain unnoticed." Lord Harry's smile widened. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" Rena blushed, and he continued, "You're right, healing the king put us in the eyes of the Seven Kingdoms, but the benefits of doing so far outweighed the issues they would cause us." "And what benefits did you gain?" Rena asked curiously. "Well, we're planning on traveling everywhere for a bit, including around the Seven Kingdoms." Rena's heart bristled at that thought. So, Westeros not being on fire is a nice incentive to have to risk a bit of attention. That brought Rena short. "What are you talking about? Imagine what would happen if a sick king died, where the realm is divided into two sides, who completely hate one another, and also ride dragons. What do you think will happen next?" The young dragon rider froze slightly in realization. "War. You did this to stop the war between the Greens and the Blacks. Not stop, delay. The rest will be up to your king, not us. We've interfered enough to keep Viserys alive, hopefully for a long time, and then we'll likely be gone from Westeros by the time any conflict starts," Lady Daphne explained. "Perhaps there won't be a conflict at all. Words can be extremely powerful, and Harry knows exactly what to say to get what he wants whenever he feels like it. It's a charming yet very annoying quality." The man smiled with false arrogance. "It's a talent, before snickering at his own ridiculousness. Rena found herself joining his laughter, which slowed into a comfortable silence. Enough boring politics. I'm more interested in how you have been. Rena hesitated for a moment. The last few days were eventful and slightly overwhelming, to say the least. She wanted to talk about her feelings about her father's newfound attention towards her, but stopped herself. Instead, she spoke of another subject, nothing much. The king's arrival caused some tensions and chaos, but it wasn't as severe. It was odd. The princess and the queen barely traded their usual barbs, and everyone looked nervous, for some reason. Ah, the king summoned my grandparents from the drift mark, but I do not know why. It was nice seeing them again. Lord Harry perked up. The Velaryons are here? That was quick. I have wanted to speak with the sea snake for a while. He could have some insights about our future expeditions. Rena chuckled. He would be happy to speak with you as well. He seemed taken with Jace and Luke's gifts. Are you sure that they're not magic? The north-pointing box must be magical. No, they're just normal items. The world is a large place, Rena, very large, and people have explored it for thousands of years. They make discoveries, slowly gain more understanding of the world around them, which can result in wonders, magical or otherwise. I am sure that a savage with stone tools would consider steel to be magic. This is the same thing. But things haven't changed in a very long time, Rena commented, feeling confused. For some reason, this question made Lord Harry have a proud expression on his face. That's very good, Rena. Very good indeed. Yes, the world hasn't changed much in the last few centuries. There hasn't been any progress, likely due to a lot of issues. For one, the Citadel cherishes its monopoly on knowledge, but in my opinion, the most likely cause would be the weather. Dealing with winters that last for years makes survival a far more important task than innovation. A mistake could easily kill you and your family. So, why risk things? If anything, things have regressed. For all its horrific uses of magic, Old Valeria was more advanced than most of Essos and Westeros. I'm not sure about Yeti or anything further east, to be honest, and its fall caused enough instability that a lot of knowledge must have been destroyed. Lord Harry looked thoughtful for a few moments before perking up. Speaking of Valeria, do you mind if I take a look at the little tyke? Rena didn't have time to even accept, not that she would have denied his request, but the moment Lord Harry motioned towards Solaris, the little dragon jumped up from her shoulders into his embrace. The sorcerer held the dragon and gently ran his fingers across Solaris' scales. The dragon seemed to enjoy the attention, given the adorable chirps it made, and Lord Harry hummed with a small smile on his face. She's growing very quickly, and her flames are conceptually different, likely an influence from her hatching. She grows more quickly in the sun. How interesting. She's slightly different from the rest of the dragons, either, at least conceptually. The properties of Amaterasu's gemstone seem to fill in some of the inconsistencies of the blood magic used in their creation. I have to admit that I'm very curious to see her growth. Rena's heart bloomed at that. She knew that Solaris was different from the other dragons. She was stronger, grew faster, and seemed to obey her commands without needing any training or even a verbal command. Maybe Solaris being special would get the Potters to stay on Dragonstone. That would be nice. If she hadn't known that Lord Harry was a sorcerer, she would have thought him to be some sort of foreign maester. There was something about the way he spoke, despite his clear dismissal of courtly courtesies, that showed that he was a learned man. Still, Rena did not have to be asked twice to brag about her dragon. Solaris is very smart. She was quiet when I needed to sneak out, as if she knew that I didn't want to be caught. She's already started to breathe fire. It's normally white, but I think that I saw it change colors once. Lord Harry hummed, how curious. Let me try something. He pressed his finger on Solaris' face, and the dragon opened her maw, releasing a burst of white flames. The fire stopped in thin air, compressing into a ball, that the sorcerer simply grabbed with his palms, looking at it very interested in the results. The ball started to shift colors before fading away once Lord Harry seemed done with it. His wife seemed just as interested and spoke up with a curious tone, "That's impressive. These dragons certainly are adaptive. A product of their creation, maybe. Maybe. But we should have noticed this property when we saw the adult dragons. The eggs could be especially flexible to allow for manipulation." "You don't sound certain," the golden-haired woman replied. "Because I'm not. Something else is at play here, something that I didn't notice," he answered with a serious expression that morphed into an excited smile. "How wonderful. Maybe the giant dragon egg has some answers," Rena spoke up. She didn't know why she did this. She knew little to nothing about magic, but she wanted to help, or at least, be part of the conversation. It had the opposite effect. The two sorcerers stopped being enraptured in their conversation, as if they remembered suddenly that she was there. Solaris jumped towards her and perched herself on her shoulders once more. Lord Harry gave her a warm look. "That's a good thought, but the egg is far more primal, has a powerful identity of its own existence, in a way. It would have the exact opposite property that your dragon displayed." Speaking of the egg, Daphne tracked down the network of weirwood trees and found similar concentrations of the trees to the ones in the Dragon Mont. "Do you think there are other giant dragon eggs?" the young girl asked, feeling excited. "We were planning on visiting the closest one soon," the sorcerer spoke up. "Now that you're here, Rena, what do you think about going on another adventure?" "I'd love to," Rena replied quickly. "Well, let's go then," Lord Harry replied before snapping his fingers. Rena blinked before finding herself in a completely different place. The first thing she felt was the cold. She shivered slightly before she noticed that she was wearing furs, somehow. She turned, and it took a few seconds to come to a realization: "We're not on Dragonstone." "We're not," Lord Harry replied, his clothes having changed as well into furs, making the dread she felt settle in her stomach. The Lady Daphne, who was standing next to him and also wearing furs, seemed to give him an irritated look. "We don't need to wear furs, Harry. Warming charms exist for a reason. Aesthetics are important, Daph." Rena interrupted their bickering. "Where did you take me?" "Like I told you, our next expedition." "Welcome, Rena, to Skagos," the man answered casually. "Oh," she simply said. It took a few moments for the answer to truly sink in. "I'm in Skagos. 123 AC, Skagos, like I told you, our next expedition." "Welcome, Rena, to Skagos," the man answered casually. "Oh," she simply said. It took a few moments for the answer to truly sink in. "I'm in Skagos." Rena knew very little of Skagos. She barely even recognized the name when Lord Harry mentioned it, only being interested when Rena realized that there were unicorns there. It was a rocky, inhospitable island in the north. Some of it was even further north than the wall, and it was inhabited by savages who were no better than wildlings. That was the extent of her knowledge. The Septa and the Maester had extensively tested her knowledge of nobility in the Seven Kingdoms, even the houses in Dorne, but she couldn't remember ever learning of any lords in Skagos. But, of course, that wasn't the first thing that went through Rena's head. Other than the unbearable cold, which made her shiver despite Lord Harry's furs, there was something that simply didn't make sense. "How are we in Skagos?" "We were just on Dragonstone. We used a portal," the sorcerer replied. She didn't know what this word was, and it was Lady Daphne who elaborated. "Imagine a doorway, one that instead of taking you from one room to the next, it uses magic to take you to another place completely. I've gotten very good at it over the years," her husband bragged. "I think I made my first portal when I was a few years older than you. I was so proud of myself then." Now I can do it without anyone even noticing. I like making it when people blink their eyes. It's always nice to see the shock on their faces. That's very nice, dear, the golden-haired woman replied with a dry tone. Lord Harry, the sorcerer who had scared off a dragon and summoned lightning from the sky, pouted, "You don't have to say it like that." Lady Daphne didn't reply and just sniffed the air, with a small smile on her face. Rena couldn't help but smile at the interaction as well. There was no doubt in her mind that the Potters adored one another. She wanted that, one day, to have someone she could be so free with, to have someone she could share jokes with like they did. She still didn't understand how Lord Harry used magic as a door to the other side of the continent, but she knew very little about magic. But even as young as she was, she knew how powerful such magic could be used in war. He could move a small army inside a castle, making their powerful walls useless. He could use it to move behind an enemy army and take it by surprise. These were only the basic uses she could come up with in seconds. Her father would likely have hundreds of tactics for their use in battle. This showed her how powerful a single man could be, and she thanked the gods that the Potters had no interest in conquest. If Aegon Targaryen could conquer Westeros with an army and 3 dragons, the Potters could do it by themselves, and likely be done in a few days. Rena shook her head, deciding not to think of conquest or wars, and instead took a proper look at her surroundings for the first time. She had to admit that Skagos looked like a miserable place to live. The land was jagged and wild, with slopes that looked like they had never known a proper road, just thin deer trails and wind-worn paths cutting through the frost. The trees were all ancient, black-barked, and heavy with snow, clustered like silent watchers over the valley. She could understand why people rarely bothered with this island, despite its size. And yet, Lord Harry said that there might be another giant dragon egg there. It didn't make sense. The dragon egg in Dragonstone was extremely hot, enough to melt stone, and the Dragonmont seemed to have more life in it. "I don't think there's a dragon egg here," she said, voicing her concerns. "You might be right," Lord Harry replied, "but there is something." He was looking at something, and Rena followed his gaze, only to find herself staring at a familiar black rock, dragonglass. She must have said it out loud because the sorcerer hummed approvingly, "That's correct. There's a significant amount of dragonglass here, not as much as Dragonstone, but enough to raise a few eyebrows. That means that there was likely a volcano here, one that became dormant. And given the fact that Daphne tracked a nexus of weirwood trees to this island, that makes it interesting to explore, huh? Who knows, there might be some other Valyrian relics here. Or more importantly, there might be something far older." Rena shivered at that, and Lady Daphne spoke up, "The island is large enough that searching it will be unfeasible. I'll try to use the network weirwood trees to narrow down the position of the nexus." With that said, the golden-haired woman waved her arm, and a small crimson seed appeared in her hand. Given its faint glow, Rena assumed that it was magical in nature. She knelt down and planted it, before making a cut on her hand, letting a few drops of blood drip on the seed. A very small weirwood tree sprang from the ground, and there was a burst of something. Rena didn't know what, but she felt something cling her skin for a few seconds, before the tree turned to dust and disappeared with the wind. Lady Daphne stared at it for a few moments before speaking up. "The nexus is a few miles north. There are wards there, so I couldn't pinpoint it exactly." Lord Harry nodded, and in the blink of an eye, their surroundings changed, and Rena found herself looking at a small black mountain. It was smaller than the Dragonmont, but it looked oddly similar. "A dormant volcano," Lord Harry explained, "that makes sense." Still, Rena couldn't help but have a few questions of her own. How did Lady Daphne do that? Her family is known for their connection to nature. It's called Druidism, a very powerful and very diverse form of magic, which Daphne has learned to make her own. What she did was momentarily tap into the network of weirwood trees that spread all over this continent. Network of weirwood trees, the young girl asked, feeling confused. What is that? Ah yes, Lord Harry replied, looking slightly embarrassed, Daphne and I have studied the trees during our time in Westeros. I must admit that its design is quite ingenious. Imagine each weirwood tree as a string in a large tapestry. Every tree is connected to the rest, as it gains power, and they do so when people die near them. You must understand that people have something called life force, essentially, the most time they can stay alive. It is a tangible thing that could be taken to extend one's lifespan, at the cost of another. Yet, people rarely ever die when it runs out, but because of disease, battle, or accidents. The remaining life force is often spread through the surroundings, and the trees absorb a fraction of this, and over time, with enough power, weirwood trees grow to connect with one another in a fundamental way. But that's horrible, Rena protested. Not quite. The weirwoods take only what cannot be used, and even then, in exchange, the memories of the deceased, their thoughts and dreams, are also absorbed as the tree, a form of immortality, in a way. That collection of consciousness, of the will and dreams of all who had fallen in Westeros for thousands of years, slowly became what is known as the Old Gods. I admit that it's a very odd form of existence, powerful but not quite alive. I wouldn't exactly call them gods, who are ascended beings of power. They don't have a unified will, no need for worship, just general blessings and curses, depending on certain actions, and even then, their intervention is quite rare. The old gods were real? Rena had never truly entertained the idea of gods. Her father, her mother, and even her stepmother were not devout. There were stories of Targaryens being closer to gods than men, but she knew that this was a lie. Her family was never particularly devout, or even faithful, for that matter. Her father often said that faith was a shackle, something to bind the small folk into obedience, and yet, Lord Harry spoke of the gods as if they were a fact of life, instead of beings of great power. Have you met any gods? She couldn't help but ask. For the first time, Lord Harry froze slightly and gave her a serious look. Yes. Remember, Rena, gods are inhuman, illogical, and very rarely benevolent. Never seek out gods, child, that road will only lead to misery. Before she could even fully digest his words, he perked up. Ah, where was I? Ah, yes, Daphne was brilliantly able to mimic the weirwood tree's properties into a seed, but since we don't have years and are not willing to sacrifice thousands of peoples to connect a single one in the network, she figured out a way to create a small pulse of magic that briefly connects a tree to the network, but the power is too much and often destroys the tree. It's not useful for the long term, but it is a very good way to tap into the network of trees. It's what allowed her to find the nexus of trees on this island and trace it to the cave before us. Rena looked around and saw that they had arrived in front of a cave, where veins of dragon glass seemed to reflect the moonlight with every movement. Lord Harry waved his hand and released a ball of light that illuminated the passage, revealing paintings on the cave walls that were similar to the ones found on Dragonstone. There were similar symbols, spirals which she had seen there, mixed with depictions of small creatures, fighting alongside men against beings of ice. She shivered at the anger of the blue eyes that felt like they were staring at her. Lady Daphne's voice broke her from her small trance. Look at that. She turned to see where the older woman was looking, only to freeze as she saw another painting, this time, spreading across the entire length of the cave. It was a serpent, as white as snow, depicted to be larger than mountains, with teeth of ice and blue, almost glowing eyes. Rena couldn't help the shiver that went down her spine. Lord Harry, on the other hand, hummed, very interesting. It seems like the long night was more eventful than I expected. Her incredulity at his response made her want to say something, anything, but her responses were cut short with a chill that spread through the entire cave. Lord Harry calmly told her, "Stay behind me, Rena." She had rarely seen the sorcerer be so serious, or be as demanding, and so, she followed his instructions to the letter. They walked forward in the cave and continued down through a tunnel near the end. Just as Rena was about to relax, a blur of movement appeared in front of her, and there was a loud screech. The young girl barely blinked as she saw a tree somehow grow from stone around her and impale a giant white spider with legs that looked like ice. Solaris perked up from her shoulder and breathed out a thin trail of white flames that somehow turned the creature to ash in mere seconds. Rena immediately screamed in fright, only for no sound seemed to leave her throat. She gave Lord Harry a panicked look, and he spoke up, "I thought it would be better not to alert the other spiders." "You can talk now." Rena trembled. What was that? "Ice spiders, I believe. There were reports of them during the long night, but I didn't think they were still alive. Very curious creature, to say the least. It almost killed me." Rena exclaimed. Lord Harry knelt down slowly. "My dear, I want you to remember a single thing. Life is dangerous, but I can guarantee you that if you stay with us and don't do something reckless like run away, you will be safe, all right? We would never endanger you." She gave him a doubtful look, and he grinned. "Believe me. It would take something far more dangerous than an elemental spider to make me nervous. Hell, even your dragon was able to kill it. If I had to guess, it's a fundamental weakness in its creation, a creature of night and ice, against the sun and flames." Rena relaxed slightly and noticed that her bracelet was glowing slightly. "What's happening to my bracelet?" "Nothing much. I added a few extra enchantments after you were attacked by the cannibal. I didn't want to risk you being attacked again because of the bracelet, so I made it so you would be hard to see or notice whenever you are in danger." Rena felt slightly embarrassed as she realized that it was likely that her ability to escape her guards had to do with the bracelet rather than any skill of her own. Still, she gave the man a small smile. "Thank you." The man ruffled her hair, at her own annoyance, before speaking up. "Onwards we go." They all moved forward into the tunnel, the ball of light guiding them forward. Similarly to the Dragonmont, they soon found themselves at the end of the tunnel, staring at a large hollow cave. As they came closer to the cave, Rena found herself shivering from the cold, and she could feel Solaris' discomfort as well. With a proper look, she realized that it wasn't nearly as large as the one on Dragonstone, and unlike the previous cavern, there was no molten stone, but a field of ice. At the bottom was also a large dragon egg, surrounded by a nest of weirwood trees as well, but the trees had lost their crimson leaves and looked paler than she expected. The egg was also far smaller than the one in Dragonstone. It looked as large as a small hovel at most. It was still extremely large, but it didn't come close. There was also a certain feeling she felt when she looked at the egg, something fundamental, that she knew without being able to explain. The egg felt dead. The walk down to the cave was in silence. No one dared say anything, and Lord Harry didn't casually explain what they were seeing. He looked curious, of course, but there was some caution there, as if he expected to be attacked at any moment. As they arrived at the frozen ice beneath, Rena realized that some humanoid people were standing around the trees. They looked frozen as well. No, they looked like they were made of ice, with blue, hateful eyes, and blades of ice in their hands. Rena shivered and spoke up, "The others." Her voice echoed in the cavern loudly, and Lord Harry replied, "That they are petrified, if I'm not mistaken, with some very powerful magic." Rena followed his gaze as they moved closer to the pale, leafless weirwoods. Their trunks were split and scarred, faces barely etched into the bark, as if whoever carved them had stopped halfway through. They were clustered tightly around the dragon egg, as though guarding it or mourning it. She didn't know why, but the closer they came, the more something in her gut twisted. It was a soft pressure, like being watched, not by something malicious, but something ancient, something that had been waiting too long. Then, without warning, the air shifted. A soft whistling cut through the stillness, and Lord Harry's hand rose a moment before the dragon glass knife reached them. It froze mid-air, spinning slowly, before he flicked his fingers and redirected it harmlessly to the side, embedding it into a wall of frost with a dull thud. From behind the withered trees, a small figure stepped out. Barely taller than Rena's waist, it was not human, its limbs were too slender, its ears too long, and its eyes, ancient. Gold and green swirled in them, sharp and cautious, narrowed on Lord Harry as two more knives of obsidian appeared in her hands. She was ready to fight. But then she stopped. She stared at Lord Harry with wide, trembling eyes, and her lips parted as if the words had been torn from her. "What, are you?" she whispered, voice cracking like old leaves underfoot. "And I told you that I had something special in mind for Skagos. I hope that you all like it, and see slightly where I'm going with this story. As usual, I don't mind rewriting this depending on your feedback, so please let me know what you think and if you have any suggestions." 123 AC, Skagos. She was ready to fight. But then she stopped. She stared at Lord Harry with wide, trembling eyes, and her lips parted as if the words had been torn from her. "What, are you?" she whispered, voice cracking like old leaves underfoot. Rena knew that she would never forget the look on the creature's face, the mixture of awe and terror, as it looked at Lord Harry. It was very similar to how most people looked at their dragons, creatures that could kill them in seconds. She understood, deep down, that Lord Harry was dangerous. He had scared off the cannibal after all. But to see a living, breathing creature stare at him like this seemed to hammer down the point. And yet, the man did not look like a monster, he simply looked at the creature with curiosity, mixed with amusement. "Me? I'm just a man." The child of the forest scoffed, "I do not know what you are, but you are no man." "I wouldn't say that I am normal," he replied with his wife snorting in amusement in the background, "and yet, I was born of the union of a man and a woman, forged in destiny and magic, tempered with experience and war. What would you call this but humanity?" "Your song is not ours, and neither is hers," she replied while motioning at the Lady Daphne, before her eyes settled on Rena, "and yet the child is one of fire and darkness. Why have you come here, strangers?" "Curiosity, I suppose. I've heard of you, the children of the forest, the emissaries of the old gods." The child of the forest glared at him, "We are not the children here." "You are not. You are old, I can see it in your eyes. You're a fascinating creature, like a mixture between a watered-down nymph and a fae, connected deeply with the network of the weirwood trees, dependent on their strength. How did the first of your kind come to be? It wasn't natural, that I can tell." For the first time, the child of the forest seemed completely taken aback. "The first of my kind was born of the first heart tree. More followed as we planted more trees." Lord Harry hummed, "How interesting. It definitely wasn't on purpose. A tree? No, a remnant of an old world, the end of a battle, death and suffering together, mixed with nature, to bring life to wood and shape it to flesh. Nature spirit indeed. I was closer than I thought. And that should also explain why you went to war with the first men for cutting down weirwood trees. They were messing with the birth of your young. What do you want, stranger?" "I want to understand." Lord Harry answered with excitement in his voice, "You don't get it, not knowing, the mystery before me. This world is broken. It has been broken for a long time, and yet it keeps on going. It is a remnant of something, and I wish to uncover it. You've been very helpful in that regard. I didn't expect to get these answers here, of all places, or even see any of your kind south of the wall." "The wall?" the creature asked with pure hope and desperation in its voice. "I am not the last. Not as far as I can tell. And yes, there was quite a large wall of ice sometimes after the battle for the dawn. I assume you were trapped since before that. Rena froze at that. The creature had been there for so long? And the cold ones, the child of the forest replied, what happened to them? I have no idea, Lord Harry answered while shrugging, there are some prophecies that they'll come back or something. What's your name, if you don't mind me asking? The creature answered with a sound that Rena simply didn't understand, and then she smirked and continued, that is what I am called, but you can call me Root. Lord Harry, on the other hand, seemed delighted, how wonderful, a name woven in the song of the world, a concept not just some word. Here, let me try it. He cleared his throat and released the same exact sound as the creature, who stood there, completely taken aback by what he had just accomplished. How? It's a wonderful name. It's a shame to just simplify it to Root. Now, let's see the reason we came here, the egg. The one in Dragonstone was a lot larger. It was all hot, melty, with a few elemental creatures guarding it. This one looks dead, the creature replied, it is dead, and it is because of my failure. I was meant to be its protector, to safeguard the egg, in exchange for using their energy to forge weapons for the battle for the dawn. They found us, the cold ones. We fought, but there were hundreds of thousands of wights, dozens of walkers. My allies had fallen and began to join the enemy's ranks. I couldn't let them take the egg. You killed the egg, used the power within to trap them inside. That petrification spell of yours was interesting. I killed them all, but I have failed my charge, and the world is lesser for it. Then why not leave? Rena asked suddenly, why didn't you go join the others? She couldn't, Lady Daphne answered instead. Root showed them her arm, where a dark, charred palm print marred the bark-like skin. They marked me, she whispered. One of the cold ones. A prince, perhaps. A creature of cold and command. The mark binds me to him, like a beacon across the weave of the world. Rena stepped closer, watching the faint shimmer of magic pulse from the mark, like a bruise that never healed. I could not let him see me. Not when I took the egg's fire and shattered his army into stillness. So, I wove protections, old things, forgotten things. Songs not sung since before your first men came. I buried myself behind layers of silence and shadow, cloaked from his gaze. And now you can't leave, Lady Daphne spoke up, you were marked, and just as the White Walkers can't get here, you can't get out, trapped by your own attack. Root looked away, seemingly in shame, perhaps it was for the best. I could not face my kin with the weight of my failures, not anymore. So, what are the others? Where did they come from? Lord Harry asked. We do not know. I was not born when the first signs appeared. My people were still at war with the first men at that time. They were cutting down our trees, burning down our forests, and our young, and then the lands of always winter disappeared from our sight. We did not care for it at the time, focused on our war. It wasn't until the war ended, until the Pact of the Isle of Faces. A few of my kind and the first men ventured north, but they never returned. It was slow at first. Weirwood trees started to die, small villages of men disappeared without a trace, leaving no bodies behind. Root's voice dropped to a whisper, as if saying the words aloud might bring those shadows back. We didn't understand at first. We thought it was the remnants of war, that the land was sick. But it was them. The cold ones. They moved like frost creeping over still water, silent, patient, unstoppable. Wherever they went, life died. And not just the body. The weirwoods, the trees that hold memory, that sing the songs of the world, they stopped singing. She glanced toward the pale trees circling the dead egg, their carved faces worn and weeping frozen sap. Our gods do not hear this place. My protections did that. To sever their gaze. It was the only way to hide, but it cut me off as well. I am no longer seen, even by my gods. There was no anger in her voice, just a hollow quiet, the kind that clung to forgotten places. I do not know what the others truly are. We call them the cold ones, but calling them others is fitting. They do not speak. They do not rest. But they remember. And they hate us all with a passion that couldn't help but unite us and our strength to fend them off. It gladdens me that we were victorious, that the world of the living remains, that I am not the last. The cavern stayed silent at this proclamation, and Rena couldn't help but imagine how terrible it must have been to be alone. The long night must have been thousands of years ago, and Root had spent all this time thinking that she was alone, that she was the last. It would have driven Rena mad, that was for sure. Lord Harry did give her a pitying look as well, but he asked another question, so you don't know what the White Walkers are, and your petrification has turned them into nothing more than an ice sculpture. I don't blame you, of course. But I'm more interested in their seemingly invincibility being overwhelmed with dragon glass. That's a conceptual weakness, not a physical one, that's for sure. I wonder. Tell me, where did dragon glass come from? How is it created? There's an abundance of it, but not too much. Root began to speak before stopping, I do not know. Frozen fire was always there, whenever we needed it. Frozen fire, dragon glass, it's so obvious, isn't it? There's a spark inside, a spark of power, that you channel with your magic. It's that spark that kills them, the concept of fire, of life. Frozen fire, what an apt name. And its origin, the eggs, perhaps. That would mean that the dragon eggs are even older than you. But that's not important, what's important is that for such a conceptual damage to happen, your enemy has to be a creature with an opposite nature, ice and death. No, it's coldness and unlife. Root gave him an odd look. We knew that. Sure, but you're not hearing me. Death is natural, but necromancy is not. Sure, playing with souls can work and can enhance a lot of things. It isn't something that appears out of nature because it's directly opposed to it. At the scale of the long night, the sun going out, the endless cold, the millions of dead bodies, animal and human alike, being controlled, we can come to a very simple conclusion. No creature, no matter how magical, could do this. They were created, they were empowered by something. A god, if I had to guess. The child of the forest prepared to speak, only to freeze. Rena noticed that Lord Harry and Lady Daphne did as well, something broke the wards. The creature child of the forest began to shiver, the mark on her hand slowly spreading over her body at an alarming speed. Root gasped, stumbling back, hand clutching her chest as the mark burned black and deep. Her eyes flared with ancient light and terror. He saw me, she whispered, voice dry as dust. Only for a moment, but it was enough. Rena instinctively moved forward, only for Lady Daphne to stop her with a firm hand. Root was already dying. I held for so long, the ancient being said, voice growing faint. But the veil is torn. He knows. He comes. Lord Harry stepped closer, power humming faintly beneath his skin. We can heal you, he said gently. I can sever the mark, rebuild the wards. Root smiled, a tired, brittle thing. No, I stayed because I thought I was the last. I stayed to bear witness, to remember, to protect. But I am not the last. That is a far greater gift than I could have ever imagined, stranger. She looked at Rena then, eyes soft with something like hope. You bear the blood of fire, but your heart is still growing. Treasure your son, child. For he truly is a wonder. Her gaze turned back to Lord Harry. Stranger. I ask of you a mercy. And this form. Let me return to the earth. Let me rejoin the trees, if the gods will still have me. The sorcerer hesitated, jaw tight. Please. Take the egg. It is dead, but it is still powerful, a remnant of old fire. If they return, it may yet burn again. Find the others, I beg of you. Find them. The man nodded and reached forward, touching Root's head. Slowly, the child of the forest started to crumble, and Rena saw a true smile on her face for the first time. She didn't seem in pain, and she slowly turned to dust, blown away by a wind that she couldn't feel. Lord Harry's expression darkened. He obviously wasn't happy with what happened, and he made a show of it. He raised his hand and made a fist. She heard a raven caw, followed by another and then another. She hadn't known there were ravens there in the first place, and yet, they seemed unsettled. Then, like pulling back a curtain, the form of a man appeared. Pale, thin, draped in tattered red. One eye was dark, lifeless, and empty. The other burned red, like a coal left too long in the hearth. His skin was stretched thin over sharp bones, hair like milk spilled in ink. He looked at Lord Harry with a completely fearful and hateful expression. You. What have you done? 123 AC, Skagos. The other burned red, like a coal left too long in the hearth. His skin was stretched thin over sharp bones, hair like milk spilled in ink. He looked at Lord Harry with a completely fearful and hateful expression. You. What have you done? Rena did her best not to gape at the apparition of the man before her. She could feel Solaris' unease at his presence as well, and she had to ask herself just how she got herself into this. The world had been so simple just a few days ago. She was the daughter of a prince, likely the future wife of the next Lord of Driftmark. Her sister was a dragon rider, and the Hightowers wished to usurp her stepmother as the next ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. It wasn't exactly a happy world, but it made sense. So far, after just a few days with the Potters, she had seen a bolt of lightning summoned from the cloudless sky and strike the cannibal. She had seen creatures of living flame and wind in the depths of the Dragon Mont. She had seen the heart of Dragonstone, a dragon egg that was as large as a mountain. And today, she had seen the living bodies of the others, the infamous White Walkers, because why wouldn't they be real as well, and spoken with one of the children of the forest. And now, there was a ghost of a man glaring hatefully at them, the creature who seemed to be responsible for Root's death. Was he a ghost? He certainly looked dead, with his stretched skin as pale as a corpse, and his single glowing red eye. Rena should have been afraid. She knew that. But instead, she felt anger, something that had simmered for years, ever since her mother's death, all of it coming back. This creature had killed Root, and she would know why. She would make him pay. Lord Harry and Lady Daphne also seemed angry, glaring at the ghost of a man, until Lord Harry put up a smile on his face, one that made her shiver despite herself. Hello there. That was quite rude, interrupting our conversation like that. You. Stranger. What have you done? Oh, don't be like that, the sorcerer spoke up casually. You're so uncomposed for a man your age, or can one call you even a man? The ghost glared at Lord Harry hatefully, and the sorcerer just continued, oh, come on, everyone knows that astral projection is a very dangerous thing to do against someone who actually knows what they're doing. You will not be leaving here without my saying, believe that, and given that you killed someone I was in the middle of such a lovely conversation with, you'll have to take responsibility for that, at the very least. And yet, the ghost seemed unwilling to talk, glaring at Lord Harry resolutely. The sorcerer's smile did not change, but Rena could feel the tension in the room increase. Oh, come on. Don't be like that. I can be very persuasive, you see. Suddenly, the ghost man began to shake, with what seemed to be golden veins glowing all over his body. The man let out a hoarse, pained gasp as the glow spread, crawling like fire beneath parchment-thin skin. Rena didn't understand any of it, but she watched the man writhe and hiss as the golden veins pulsed brighter. He looked like he was being burned from within, like something sacred and angry had taken hold of him. Maybe it had. Then he screamed out, "Stop! Stop it, please!" And just like that, the trembling stopped. What was that? Lord Harry still had the exact same smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. That was time catching up to you. You didn't seriously think that your little actions would have no consequences, did you? "I don't understand," the ghost man replied. "How is this possible?" "All right," Lord Harry spoke up, rolling his eyes, "you obviously don't understand what time is, or how it works, so, which actually explains a lot about what works here. You're of this time, that I can easily tell. I want to say you're around a couple of centuries in advance, if I had to guess. It's through a form of scrying with your soul, enough to affect subtle changes at the cost of your own life force." The man's lone red eye widened. Lord Harry's predictions were on the spot, if Rena had to guess. There was a lot that she didn't understand, but she knew that Lord Harry said that the man was from the future. Was that true? Was that even possible? How would the world even be after such a long time? It made her feel small, just a speck in front of the man who could walk through time unscathed. Her thoughts were interrupted as Lord Harry continued, "You see time as a story, a book whose pages you can read. It's not. Every time you get involved, every action you take in the past changes things, as long as it doesn't affect your present. Curiously, everything you see actually restricts your actions, because in your timeline, you can't see it." "The ink is dry," the ghost man simply replied. "That's not quite it. Time can be rewritten if one knows what they're doing and has the power to do so. It's a very strong force of nature, one that tries to mend itself on its own. It seems like the world itself would resist your change, and it does, because you cannot change what you know is a fact. What could change the present? Even then, you'd need a lot of power to change things, something like perhaps, a network of life force, a tree, channeled through a soul, tied to it so completely that it could use the energy of the weirwood trees as if it were its own life force. You have paid a very steep price for this indeed." "How do you know?" the ghost man rasped. The sorcerer shrugged. "I can hear it on you, but that's not the right question to ask. What if you could change a fixed point in time? What if you had the power to change something fundamentally, something that you know is an absolute fact? What if someone fought against time and won? Well then, you end up with a paradox. Either the world splits, a timeline becomes two, or time tries to erase what's wrong, like, for example, killing the soul acting as the bridge between the 2 points of time. And believe me, no matter how much power is in the network of weirwood trees, it's barely more than a drop in the ocean of time. You seek to erase me? Oh, no. I just made a decision to make a few changes, and then I changed my mind. Your soul is trapped here, and it will remain stuck here without my say-so, and believe me, being unmade, your very soul destroyed, is a far worse fate than death. Oh, look at me rambling. I have always been excited when I talk about magic." The ghost's expression turned neutral, and he asked, "What do you want?" "Oh, I want many things, to uncover the mysteries of this world, to glimpse eternity and beyond, to understand the world. But let's start with your name." "I want to say Brendan." "Oh, your connection to the weirwood tree occluded it well enough, but you still have your sense of identity, and with it your name. A bastard, a kinslayer, an advisor, a crow, they're all identities you've taken over the years. Now, you only killed Root when she was about to answer a certain question. I would like to know why." "You know why," the man, Brendan, rasped back. "Some knowledge is too dangerous to be revealed. The Earthsingers are old creatures, and some things are better left forgotten. Perhaps, but I would make my judgment. If a god created the White Walkers, with the sole purpose to destroy every living thing on Planetos, then I would like to know more. Why do you care, stranger? Why do you meddle in the affairs that do not concern you? Curiosity, I suppose, Lord Harry answered without any hesitation. Curiosity, the ghost man, Brendan, repeated with a stunned look on his face. You would jeopardize centuries of careful planning, on the desperate hope to stop the end of all things. This is a responsibility that I have shouldered, a burden that I suffer through, a purpose that I sacrificed everything for. And you have decided to destroy it all for something as banal as curiosity. The sorcerer, though, snorted in amusement. Plans. This is really funny. That plan of yours must be a very flimsy thing that you need to kill someone 2 centuries in the past, just to make sure things don't spiral out of control. You're not used to being denied, are you, little raven? Of things not working out. You'll have to grow out of that little habit if you stand a chance at saving humanity. You don't understand, he finally said, voice raw. You meddle in a tapestry you cannot unravel. Root was a thread. A frayed one, but vital. Her death was necessary. But why, the sorcerer asked, why was it necessary? Why did you not want her to speak with me? The one-eyed man remained silent, and Lord Harry shook his head bitterly. You don't know, do you? I should have seen it. You're the puppet, but not the will. You paid a very steep price indeed. Was it fear, I wonder, that drove you to accept such a fate? What do you know of fear, stranger? The ghost man exclaimed with anger and frustration in his voice. I have seen the end. I have lived through it. I saw the world enveloped in an endless winter. I have bargained with the gods. I have sacrificed my own blood to hold the tide for one more generation. You think yourself wiser because you wear no crown, carry no title. But you. I never claimed to be wise, Harry interrupted softly, just curious. But I am not the one who built a prison of time and filled it with corpses. The room fell quiet. The sorcerer continued, the very powerful and the very stupid have one thing in common, they don't change their views to fit the facts. They change the facts to fit their views, which can be uncomfortable if you happen to be one of the facts that needs changing. Who are you? Brendan finally asked. Oh, I'm just a traveler, going about, seeing interesting things, meeting interesting people, and maybe even right a few wrongs along the way. I don't believe that. Lord Harry snickered. Luckily, your opinion means less than nothing to me. Suddenly, the ghost man started to twist in pain, his crimson eye glowed slightly, and he started to let out red tears. He spoke in a scratchy tone, unnatural, like it was spoken by thousands of voices at once. It wasn't the common tongue, or High Valley Ryan, Rena knew that, but she could understand it all the same. Stranger. The entire cavern shook with the voice as it spoke. Rena felt herself shiver in fright. It was more than when she stared at the cannibal's face, alone, knowing that she would likely die seconds later. It was something fundamental that she was facing something more than human, something so powerful that she couldn't even describe it. She felt the urge to be pressed down, and was only held up by Lady Daphne, who finally looked at the arrival with seriousness in her eyes. And yet, Lord Harry remained unperturbed, unconcerned by the pressure that the ghost now emanated. Here you are, he spoke casually, the power behind the man. Leave. Oh, but we've just started to get to know one another. My name is Harry Potter. This is my lovely wife, Daphne. Oh, this is Rena, her little dragon is Solaris. Interloper. The voices answered, and Rena could feel the anger stemming from them. Now, that's just rude. Here I am making introductions, and you're being all judgy and pushy. And rude. I have to say rude twice. You do not belong here. Then Rena felt herself being pushed to the ground. It was just for a second, but she felt it, the stillness, a pressure older than oaths, the kind that made the bones ache and the mind falter. Rena stumbled back without meaning to, as if something inside her screamed to run. Solaris snarled, wings flaring in panic. She felt like her breath was being taken from her, and in that endless second, she thought that she would die, in this cavern, halfway across the world, and yet just as quickly as it appeared, the feeling disappeared completely. Lord Harry stepped in front of her, his face devoid of his previous amusement, devoid of the kindness and mischievousness he should have. He waved his hand, and a scythe appeared in his hand. Their blades looked like a rainbow in solid form. The weapon released a pressure of its own, meeting that of the apparition dead on. Both forces battled, the cavern shaking from the conflict, before it stopped. Lord Harry stepped forward and spoke up in a serious tone, "Your little raven asked me who I am. There have been many attempts to kill me, I've lost count. Gods, demons, mages, men, entities beyond them, all of them have tried. None of them succeeded. Not a single one. They all lost, and burned, and ran. That's who I am. So, tell me, is this a fight you want to pick?" And then, the ghost, no, the thing behind it, pulled away. The projection twisted once, like smoke unraveling in the wind, and then vanished, leaving behind only silence. Rena released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Lord Harry turned back, brushing a speck of dust from his coat. "Well, that was dramatic," he said. "Now, I suppose that's enough excitement for today. Let's go home." In the blink of an eye, they disappeared, leaving a destroyed cavern and an empty nest of weirwoods, devoid of the dead dragon egg that it previously held. And I wanted to add a bit more tension to the expedition. It's something I'm planning to tie to other expeditions as well, with a bit of a theme. I'm not sure it came out like I wanted it to. The main idea is to have Harry slowly discover the origins of the world and why it feels shattered, so to speak. I've never written a mystery-based story before, so I'm pretty new at it, so please let me know if something feels off. As usual, please let me know what you think and if you have any suggestions. 123 AC, Dragonstone. Rhaenys returned to the bedchambers provided for her, feeling slightly faint after her conversation with Viserys. She was to be Hand, now. She was to essentially rule the realm, as she would have had she been queen. A small part of her relished at the thought, at the vindication as the man who had won against her, who the realm had chosen in her stead, admitted to needing her help. And yet, the larger part of her just felt tired. Her children's deaths had changed her, all but extinguished the flames of any ambition she had to rule. What was a throne compared to seeing her son and daughter soar happily on their dragon? What was power compared to the sound of their laughter echoing in the skies? What use was a crown when there were no little feet running through Driftmark's halls, no wide eyes looking up to her with pride and trust? The realm could keep its titles. She would have given anything, everything, for just one more day with them. She entered the room, seeing Corlys waiting for her, obviously pacing around. "Well, it seems that my cousin decided that I am to be Hand." Her husband's shoulders slumped, likely from relief, before putting a smile on his face. "Finally, the king has acknowledged you. You will make a splendid Hand, Rhaenys. It only took a miracle from the gods for that to happen." The queen who never was snorted in amusement, nothing of the sort. Viserys knows that this won't look good, especially with the lords who supported him during the Great Council, but he finally realized that the spat between Rhaenyra and Alicent is more than just some words spoken. He needed someone who would not favor one side or another. I think that he realized how much authority he gave Otto Hightower during his illness and now needs to balance the scales in his court. Corlys gave her an odd look, seemingly realizing what she meant. Rhaenys disliked Rhaenyra and Daemon. The two were alike in many ways. They held the same arrogance, the same recklessness, and the same dismissal of non-Valyrian lords of the realm. It was somewhat acceptable when they were younger, but as a man and woman grown, with children of their own, it was very hard to justify much of their actions and their decisions. However, she could have lived with this dislike. She hated them with a passion for what happened to her children. She had made no effort to hide this from her husband, even insisting that their granddaughters inherit Driftmark, and yet Corlys had refused. Rhaenys would not favor the Hightowers, the mere thought of it was ridiculous, but she would not favor Rhaenyra either. This was why Viserys had chosen her, after all. It wasn't because he felt guilty for usurping her, not because he thought she would make a good hand, but because she would not favor one claim over another. Corlys, though, looked angry. Even if he started to hate it, you would not support your grandson's claim. Jacaerys is a wonderful boy, husband, she replied evenly, and Laenor loved him, but he is not our grandchild. You know that, right? Corlys slammed his hand on the table. He has my name. It is enough. And if everything goes well, if Rhaenyra becomes queen, what do you think will happen when Jacaerys inherits the throne? If you think that things are tense now, then it will be worse when a man, rumored to be a bastard, sits on the Iron Throne. Viserys' miraculous recovery likely saved the realm from tearing itself apart. He realized this and wanted to save it, even if everything seemed lost. He stared at her, jaw clenched, fury simmering behind his eyes. But he didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. They had argued this too many times before. But this time was different. This time, she had power. It was her own, independent of her dragon, of Corlys, of Driftmark. She loved him still, gods help her, but the Iron Throne had become his obsession. I will do my duty, she continued, voice softer now, but no less firm. I will sit at the council table and keep the realm from bleeding. But I will not burn it down for a name, not even ours, not that it matters anyway. How could it not? He asked, gritting his teeth. Making me hand isn't something that Viserys came up with. I know my cousin, and he wouldn't have thought of it. It definitely wasn't the Hightowers or Daemon. Rhaenyra would have preferred to be hand, herself. No, this was someone else's work, someone who Viserys listened to more than Otto Hightower. The sorcerer, Corlys muttered in realization, Viserys would listen to the man who saved his life. But why would a foreigner, with magic or otherwise, advise the king to make you, his hand? I do not know, and I intend to find out, she replied hesitantly. He is obviously playing a long game. He manipulated Rhaenyra into saving her father with that magic potion, something that shook the current state of affairs in a way that made me the perfect candidate as hand. No one saw this coming. I don't think anyone would have ever expected this, and I can't help but wonder what else might be coming, what else he might be planning. We need to be prudent here, Corlys, very prudent, and not bet everything on Rhaenyra and Viserys' blindness when it comes to her actions. It was concerning, to say the least, that a sorcerer, a man with unknown ambitions, had so much influence over the king of the Seven Kingdoms. From the sound of it, the man spent barely more than a few minutes with him, and yet Viserys was like a changed man, akin to a frantic man who wishes to fix the realm before he dies. If she were to be hand, she needed to know the threats to the realm. I'll have to meet him. Her husband stiffened as he realized what she had just said. You wish to meet a known sorcerer, alone. Do you not remember what I told you of Assai? What I experienced there? Ah, he had. Assai was a city known for its open practice of the higher mysteries. Corlys loved to boast of his journeys, of his adventures there, but he rarely, if ever, spoke of what happened in the city, only that he lost half of his crew, but there was more to it, a melancholy that she rarely saw in him. Rhaenys never pressed, but she knew her husband enough to make a few guesses. There was a woman involved. Rhaenys didn't begrudge him for it, this was before their marriage, but losing someone he loved to magic in Assai had made him very wary of the craft. From Corlys' grief, the woman was likely long dead, leaving scars that hadn't faded even after decades of marriage. Nevertheless, she was resolute in her decision. This is out of necessity, Corlys. If I am to be Viserys' hand, then I must know of any dangers to the realm, which includes sorcerers from foreign lands who have a disturbing amount of influence over his decisions. I am not some useless maiden, I am a dragon rider and was once a candidate to rule the 7 kingdoms. Have faith that I will succeed, husband. I am not doubting you, Corlys protested. Magic is dangerous. Far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. It has rules, and Viserys' healing must have had a price. I just fear that you would be the one to pay it. If this Harry Potter proves to be a threat, then I suppose he would make a good meal for Melies. Her husband let out a brief laugh. Not everything can be solved with dragons, my love. But I refuse to let you meet this man alone. I will come with you. Rhaenys was touched at that. Her husband feared magic, and that he would force himself to face it again, just for her sake, made her heart warm slightly. It made her realize that they hadn't truly enjoyed each other's company since their children's deaths. Deciding not to push him further, she joked, "You only wish to ask the man of his gifts to the little princes." Corlys didn't even deny it. "You don't understand, these gifts could change sea travel forever, a way to always find north, and a far better far-eye than I have ever seen, and it can fit it in the palm of my hand. I must know of their origins. I suspect that magic was used, but I cannot know for certain." With the mention of these gifts, any hesitation he expressed had disappeared. Of course, Corlys only cared for objects relating to seafaring, but Rhaenys had to admit that in the brief time she had seen the children's new trinkets, they were very impressive. Rhaena and Baela's gifts were impressive, a small thin dagger for the eldest and a bracelet with some sort of dark crimson gemstone for Rhaena, but it was the boys' gifts that raised some eyebrows. The collapsible far-eye and the North Pointer had fascinated her husband, and even little Joffrey's toy dragon that somehow moved its wings, made her suspect magic as well, the moment she knew of their origins. From the sound of it, the children had loved Lord Harry and Lady Daphne, but Rhaenys did not have the time to ask for more information before she was summoned by Viserys, something that she regretted now that she knew of the man's capabilities. She looked out of the window and saw the moon's silver light shining outside. An idea sparked in her mind. She stood up and said, "Come. We have barely rested since we got Viserys' raven this morning. Let's walk for a while." Corlys didn't protest, didn't ask where. He just gave her a faint smile, rose and followed, as he always had. The halls of Dragonstone were near empty at this hour, save for the occasional guard standing still as stone. "We used to walk together, just the two of us, for hours on end. We were younger then. I don't think you could make it an hour before complaining about your joints," Rhaenys teased. Her husband let out an affronted huff. "I'll have you know that I'm at the peak of my strength." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever you say, husband." They walked in a comfortable silence for a few minutes before speaking up. "You do know that your new post will change things. Rhaenyra and Daemon will expect you to support their cause, and your desire for neutrality will not go well. And yet, I expected that tying my children to them wouldn't have ended with them dead. We do not always get what we want." Corlys' eyes flashed with grief for a second. "You are not the only ones who grieves them, Rhaenys. I know. I apologize." Her husband remained silent before changing the subject. "As I said, you will be expected to support your grandchildren, and that comes with Rhaenyra's claim to the throne. In a way, your neutrality will be a sign of supporting Alicent's cause, as you wouldn't be acknowledging Rhaenyra's children as laners. This will have many repercussions, both for Rhaenyra's cause and our house's reputation." Rhaenys knew that her husband was correct on that point. She was expected to support Rhaenyra, even if she loathed the woman, for Jacaerys' claim as her heir. Her neutrality would let rumors of their parentage have more weight, and Rhaenyra could leverage Rhaena and Baela to make things complicated. They didn't know of Baela becoming the next Lady of Driftmark, which she could use to foster her granddaughters in her and Corlys' domain, removing Rhaenyra's ability to use them as leverage. Truth be told, Even if Rhaenys liked Rhaenyra's children, they were not her own. It was their mother's responsibility to secure their inheritance, not her own. Rhaenyra would need to fend off the rumors herself. Then again, Baela inheriting Driftmark would be the final nail in the coffin for the accusations of bastardy of Rhaenyra's children, a clear show that the Velaryons did not think of them as their own. Corlys would likely be furious at the slight to Laenor, and Rhaenys knew that her son loved the boys as if they were his own, but her granddaughter's birthright was more important, and she would not give it away, not for anything, and especially not for Rhaenyra. Corlys might concern himself with their house's reputation, and would likely be angry when this was announced, which was why she would keep it to herself. She'd need to convince him first, and with Viserys' support, she would be successful. But things were too unstable, her husband was too wary, to support Lucerys' removal as the Lord of Driftmark. It would hurt his name, the legend he had spent his life crafting, and he would be enraged with that. When had things become so complicated? She could remember, just a few decades prior, Corlys walking beside her, regaling her with tales of his adventures. He had been so proud of his voyages and the wonders he had seen. She had listened, amused and intrigued, as he spoke of distant lands and forgotten gods, of merchants who traded in shadows and spices, of cities carved into glass and bone. He had brought her shells from the Thousand Islands and pearls from Yeti, each one handed to her with a smile and a story. Back then, the world had felt wide and full of promise. Now, it felt small, boxed in by grief, and she was all but plotting against her husband to make their eldest granddaughter inherit his seed. She hadn't sought this out, but Viserys' promise had made it too much of a prize to ignore. Rhaenys prepared to say something, only to pause mid-breath. A flicker of motion caught her eye, low to the ground, just beyond the arch of the next corridor. Her eyes narrowed. It was a slight figure, creeping along the edge of the hallway with the awkward silence of someone who'd done it more than once. Silver hair glinted in the moonlight, and perched on her shoulders, wings tucked tight, was her new hatchling, Solarys. Her tone sharpened. Rhaena Targaryen. The girl froze like a rabbit caught in torchlight. Corlys stepped forward, voice flat. What in the seven hells are you doing out of your chambers? --123 AC, Dragonstone. Rhaena's return to her room had been spent mostly contemplating what she had just experienced. Lord Harry didn't explain much of what happened in that cavern, and she had a feeling that he regretted bringing her with them. She had seen something that she wasn't meant to. If she had to guess, she was welcome to see the dragon egg, and even the child of the forest, but not the one-eyed ghost, or the entity that spoke through him. Lord Harry hadn't explained everything in detail, something that was odd, given his proclivity to teach, much like a maester, but with magic and adventures. Both Lady Daphne and he had remained quiet during their trip back to the manse and hadn't truly spoken to her. They had given her more of that heavenly brown drink, and Rhaena felt like they were waiting for her to leave to have a proper conversation. She could understand why. Rhaena wasn't the most knowledgeable when it came to magics and theology, but what she had seen, what she had experienced, was godly. She had seen something beyond man, beyond sorcery, speak through the ghost man, and the words felt like power. And yet, Lord Harry stood there, staring down at the power of a god, and made it flee. Rhaena had seen much during the last adventure. She had seen proof that the Long Night existed, was attacked by one of the legendary ice spiders, seen the frozen forms of the White Walkers, and spoke to one of the children of the forest. And yet, it all paled before this moment, where a sorcerer confronted a god and won. It was then that she clearly realized one simple fact. She had no idea who the Potters were, really. They were travelers, yes. They were powerful. They had magic. They had strange manners, owned strange objects, and walked with such confidence, an assuredness that nothing could threaten them, and given what she had seen, they were right to. Lady Daphne was barely fazed by the presence of a god, let alone her husband's power. She snuck back to the castle, with many thoughts swirling in her mind, Solaris giving her comfort with just her presence. She neared her chambers when she heard a familiar voice speak up sharply, "Rena Targaryen." Rena stiffened, heart thudding, and turned around slowly, dreading the look on her grandmother's face, which made her feel very intimidated for some reason. Her grandfather stepped forward with a similar severe look on his face. "What in the seven hells are you doing out of your chambers?" The young girl knew that she had to give them a good explanation, one that was intelligent, thoughtful, and plausible. She dreaded her father or sister knowing of her adventures. Her sister would likely wish to have joined her, but she did not know how her father would react. If she were to guess, he would go to the potter's manse, with Caraxes behind him, and wielding Dark Sister, for endangering her. Looking back, the Potters hadn't said anything about keeping their adventures to themselves. She wasn't forbidden from telling anyone of what they had discovered. Of course, the spirits of fire, wind, and molten stone, deep in the Dragonmont, would likely kill most people who would wish to see the giant dragon egg, and no one would believe that she had gone to Skagos of all places for an afternoon. Oh, her grandparents were still staring at her, expectantly. Right, she still needed a clever and plausible reason for being out of her room in the middle of the night, without any guards. It had to be something that would fool them. Rena knew that she could do this. She was smart, wasn't she? It should be easy. Unfortunately for her, she blurted out, "I was walking Solaris." Rena winced as the words left her mouth, and her grandmother pounced on her explanation, her gaze somehow becoming sharper, "You were walking your dragon." He was feeling cooped up, the young girl explained while trying not to wince at her statement, "and I couldn't sleep, so we walked around the castle." She looked up and saw her grandmother's eyes soften. "You know, Rena, your mother had the exact same look on her face when she lied." Rena went still at the mention of her mother. Her father tried to avoid the topic as much as possible, and her stepmother rarely spoke of her. Her grandfather's eyes seemed to smile often. "Do you remember the time she tried to sneak onto one of my ships?" His wife snorted in amusement. "I believe she blamed it on a swarm of butterflies that accidentally guided her to the ship." Truly, her claiming Viagar was for the best. I shudder to think what kind of mischief she would have caused, had she not been too preoccupied with flying the beast. Rena smiled at the story, feeling warm at a tale of her mother that she hadn't heard before. Sadly, she had just realized that she did not know much of her mother as a person, not as her mother. Before her death, she was always Mother, the woman who told her stories of Driftmark and comforted her when her father did not spend time with her. She gave her grandparents a teary smile. "Can you tell me more about her?" "My mother, I mean." Lady Rennis knelt down and enveloped her in a hug. Rena could hear Solaris' hiss of discomfort, and yet she returned the hug immediately. Of course, that was when her grandmother let go of her and gave her a small smile. "I'll be glad to tell you more stories, sweetling. Gods know that your mother caused enough trouble to fill an entire book, but why don't you start by telling me what you have hidden in your sleeves?" Rena's entire body stilled. Did her grandmother only hug her to see if she had anything else on her person? Or perhaps, she had just noticed that there was something in her sleeves. She did hug her quite tightly, and the sewn-in pockets in her sleeves could be pressed against her. That didn't matter. Fear spiked up in Rena. She had no choice now, did she? Slowly and hesitatingly, she took out the black dagger, made of dragon glass, and presented it to them, looking down, trying to avoid their gaze. It had been a gift from Lord Harry, a way to remember Root by keeping one of her daggers. She noticed that it was something that he did frequently, kept small things to remember their adventures, and he urged her to do the same. First, there was a Valyrian steel ring and dagger from their adventure in the Dragonmont, as well as a small blade of dragon steel, the odd black metal that was created by the egg, and now, one of Root's dragonglass daggers for the Skagos expedition. What is this, Rena? Her grandmother asked with obvious concern in her tone. Her grandfather answered in her stead, this is dragonglass. There were stories of daggers made of the material that were used for certain spells or rituals. I've seen similar ones being used in Asai. Seven knows what they did with it. Did the sorcerer give you this, Rena? The young girl froze completely in her tracks. Her grandfather's eyes were wild with a mixture of anger and fear. She didn't know what to say. Never in her wildest dreams did she think that they would guess this, and so quickly, too. While Lord Harry never said to keep their adventures secret, Rena didn't want other people to know. Her adventures with the Potters were hers, and hers alone, and she did not want to share them or, worse, for the adventures to stop. Sure, it could be terrifying, like what happened in Skagos, but the wonders that she had seen, the history that she witnessed, were worth it. The sound of her grandfather coughing broke her train of thought, and she realized that she hadn't said anything for some time since he had asked her the question. Her grandmother glared at him and gave her a kind smile. How long have you been practicing magic, Rena? Magic? Why would she be practicing magic? Sure, she was tempted to ask Lord Harry or Lady Daphne to teach her, but she never had the courage to go through with it. Realization dawned in Rena's mind. They thought that she was learning magic or had magic used on her by the Potters. I never used magic, grandmother. Then why do you have it? Her grandfather asked, doing his best to suppress his discomfort. Why do you have a knife that is used for magic? His tone was severe, commanding. Rena had never seen her grandfather like this. He was usually so composed, quick to smile and laugh, but could contain his discomfort and anger easily. This was different. He was looking at her like he didn't recognize her. Like she'd brought something dangerous into their home. He might not mean it, not truly, but she could see the fear in his eyes and the way he looked at that knife, as if it would come to life and kill them all. She wanted it to go away, that look in his eyes. She wanted him to be her grandfather again. It's not mine. It belonged to one of the children of the forest, she blurted out, before realizing what she had just said. She hadn't meant to say it, but she couldn't lie, not now, not with both of them looking at her like that. Not when her grandfather looked at her like she was a monster in hiding. There was silence. A long, heavy silence settled over the hallway like snowfall. Corley's expression froze. His eyes darted to Renus, then back to the dagger, then to Rena again, as if trying to determine whether this was a jest, a childish mistake, or something far more dangerous. Her grandmother composed herself faster than he did, and she asked, "Why don't we continue this conversation in your chambers?" Rena could only nod, limbs stiff as she followed them down the hall, Solaris clutching tighter around her shoulders. The silence between them was not quite accusatory, but it weighed on her all the same. She could feel tears gathering near her eyes, and she did not know why. She wasn't sad, was she? Or perhaps did her grandfather's accusations hurt her so much? When they entered her chambers, her grandmother gave her another hug and wiped her tears. "Sweetling, we are only worried about you. Your grandfather just had bad experiences with magic during his travels, and I understandably worried. Now, why don't you explain everything about it? We promise not to tell anyone, not even your father, but you should be honest with us." Rena nodded, feeling slightly better. Even her grandfather's eyes softened when he looked at her. "It started the night Solaris hatched. I snuck out to the Dragon Mont. I wanted to claim a dragon, the Grey Ghost. I ended up being chased by the cannibal. Lord Harry saved me and sent the dragon away. He and Lady Daphne comforted me and promised that I would have a dragon of my own. That night, when I went to sleep holding my egg, it hatched, and I found Solaris in my arms." "He hatched your egg, without even being present," her grandmother commented with surprise in her tone. Yes. I think it had something to do with the bracelet he had given me when we broke our fast. It was almost glowing before Solaris hatched. Now, it simply feels empty, and the glow has stopped. I went to visit him, later, to repay him for his kindness. How? The sea snake asked. By warning him of the king coming to see him. After all, Princess Rhaenyra flew to King's Landing, after speaking with him, and father had just told me of the court coming to Dragonstone. Now, I know that it was because he gave something to the princess to heal the king, but I did not know then. I went to warn him, and we ended up on a small adventure near the Dragon Mont. What sort of adventure? Her grandmother asked. Lord Harry and Lady Daphne are adventurers, travelers who like to explore old tombs, old legends, and histories. They came to Westeros to study it. They found a small cave in the Dragonmont with very old cave paintings, going back to the Age of Heroes. I was invited to come with them. I do not regret it. We found much there. She grabbed a small box underneath her bed and opened it, revealing her treasures. Her grandfather looked at its content with fascination, and gave her an odd look. This is Valyrian steel. Where did you find it? There were bodies, old Valyrian, who tried to explore the Dragonmont before the doom. They had sealed a section of it with magic. And what is this? I've never seen such a metal, Rhaenys said. It's called dragon steel. Lord Harry believes that it was the metal the first men used during the Long Night. The Long Night is nothing more than a story to terrify the children of the North, her grandfather protested. No, Rhaena answered, shivering at the sight of the ice beings in Skagos. I saw the bodies of some. They looked like they were made of frozen ice, instead of flesh. I have seen ice spiders, as large as a horse, and I met one of the last children of the forest. Is that where you received the dragon glass dagger? The sea snake continued. Were you just on one of your expeditions in the Dragonmont? Rhaena almost corrected him, telling him that she was in Skagos, but stopped herself, telling her grandparents that she'd traveled halfway across the continent in the blink of an eye would likely be too unbelievable for them. Yes. The Potters have been nothing more than accommodating. They teach me things about the world that I never thought were true, and their magic doesn't use any blood or sacrifices. Please don't think they've done anything wrong. They've always treated me with kindness, like I was someone worth listening to. Someone who mattered. Her voice faltered slightly at the end, and Rhaenys reached out to place a gentle hand over hers. We don't think you're lying, Rhaena, her grandmother said, voice quiet but sure. But you must understand, this is a great deal. The children of the forest, the Long Night, dragon glass blades, and dragon steel. It sounds like tales spun by bards. Her grandfather, ever the sailor, was still staring at the Valyrian steel blade in the box, but his voice had lost its earlier heat. Tales, yes, and yet you carry proof of them. Rhaena looked between them, her throat tight. Please, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Please don't tell anyone. Not father. Not the princess. They'll forbid me from seeing them again, and I can't lose this. Not after everything. Her words tumbled out in a rush. You understand, don't you, grandfather? You went on adventures, too. You've seen strange lands, met people with magic and wonder. You know what it's like to chase after something real. Corlys blinked and shared a look with his wife for just a fraction of a second. Then, he chuckled and leaned back slightly, a glimmer of pride softening the lines around his mouth. 7 hells, you've got that fire from me, haven't you? Laena was just like that. Adventurous, headstrong, never content with the walls built around her. She would have loved you fiercely. That caught something in Rhaena's chest and held it there, warm and aching. But her grandmother's voice cut in, calm and unrelenting. We'll need to meet them. Lord Harry and Lady Daphne. Speak with them face to face. If they are to keep taking you on these excursions, then they must answer to us first. Is that understood? Rena nodded quickly, eyes still wet but shining. Yes, grandmother. I understand. She threw her arms around both of them in a fierce hug, burying her face in her grandmother's shoulder. Neither pulled away. When she finally stepped back, there was still anxiety in her heart, uncertainty and fear of what came next, but it was wrapped in something gentler now. Hope. Relief. She crawled into bed, Solaris coiling beside her, warmth seeping from his scales. For the first time in what felt like weeks, she didn't feel like she had to carry it all alone. And, phew, that was harder to write than I expected. I know that some reactions, especially Corley's, seem out of sorts, but I tried to make it biased from Rena's perspective, who is still just a child, and mentally exaggerated everything. It's something that I'm trying, and I hope that I pulled it off. Also, this conversation is different from Rena and her grandparents' perspective. They know that there's something going on, but don't really trust the story from a kid. It's hard to explain, but you'll see it in more detail in the next chapter. As usual, please let me know what you think and if you have any suggestions. Chapter 25, A Tower's Choice 123 AC, King's Landing. Otto Hightower sat at the helm of the small council table, and he couldn't help but wonder how everything went so wrong. No, he knew perfectly well how everything went wrong, with Rhaenyra consorting with foul sorcerers, likely pushing it as a way to further legitimize her claim on the Iron Throne. The tales had started to spread, despite Otto's effort to stifle them. Many servants, as well as a few members of the court, had seen the king walking around like a young man in his prime, other than the lost hand, of course, which hadn't healed. Princess Rhaenyra had flown from Dragonstone with a miracle of the seven and healed her father. She was painted as a devoted princess, blessed by the gods, a dutiful woman who had done her best to heal her father. In a few moons, all of the continents would know, and years of efforts discrediting her would have been for naught. He had cultivated rumors, some of them true, some of them not so much. In the end, it didn't matter. It mattered what people believed, not what was true. But he had to admit that it had been easier than he expected, far easier, in fact. It was for the best, truly. He could only imagine what Rhaenyra and Daemon would turn the court should she become queen. King's Landing would turn to a city of debauchery and bloodlust, after a year at the most. Sometimes, he regretted Alicent's marriage to the king. Aegon was to be king by the law of inheritance. If he had known of Viserys' insistence on Rhaenyra remaining as his heir, he would have likely found another match for his daughter, perhaps even making her the Lady of Casterly Rock. It was likely his greatest regret, looking back, his daughter's marriage and the chaos that followed. He had been so proud, so certain, when Viserys chose Alicent as his bride, when she bore him a son, and yet, when he was so close, all he had received was a dismissal as Viserys' hand. Having his blood on the Iron Throne should have been his gift after so many decades of service. He had all but run the realm, starting from King Jaehaerys' last few years of life, where he was too ill and grief-stricken to rule, and made the realm prosper despite Viserys' blunders. He wouldn't say he was completely impartial, but the realm had prospered under his rule. He only wished that he had a descendant who would one day become king. He often dreamt of his place in the history books, the second son, who fathered a dynasty despite all odds. He had gotten too comfortable, he realized this now. He had believed that Viserys would follow his advice, as it always had. He wasn't wrong, even. Having a woman as the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms wouldn't be received well by the lords of the realms. There would be some instability, followed by a likely rebellion. Aegon being heir was the logical and obvious decision. And yet Viserys chose otherwise and remained stubborn on the matter. When he returned as Hand, he was disappointed to see Alicent barely having made any progress in securing Aegon's inheritance and instead was preoccupied with her childish feud with Rhaenyra, which had ended with Aemond losing an eye and Alicent attacking the crown princess. Viagar's claiming was a boon to their cause, but the affair, and especially Viserys' reaction to it, or lack of reaction to be more precise, turned what could have been an inheritance, a political maneuver, into a war of survival. It showed that Alicent had little to no influence on the king despite bearing him 4 children, and that she had wasted her time as queen, endangering them all. Of course, Rhaenyra followed by securing Caraxes by marrying Daemon, the man who hated Otto with a passion, which had all but ensured that this would end in blood. The king's illness, as tragic as it was a boon to Otto. He hated himself for it, sometimes. Viserys had once been a friend, a true one, during his time as Hand after the Great Council. He had served him faithfully, but wasn't it Viserys who betrayed him first, by choosing Rhaenyra over Aegon, that even his grandfather, who was known for his wisdom, would have counseled against? He had put Otto in this position, and in a way, he thought that the mysterious illness was a curse from the gods themselves, punishing him for the instability he brought to the realm with his foolish choices. Otto had used this to gain more leverage over the court, influencing lords, in a way that, should Viserys die, Rhaenyra would see much of the High Lords protesting her ascension as well as a mighty opposition in the form of Sunfire, Dreamfire, a grown Tessarion, and Viagar, which would stay her hand and sue for peace. Daemon would be assassinated, of course, and the girl would finally accept what should have been her role in the first place. Otto could even leverage a promise to Lady Rhaenys of her granddaughter's inheritance of the Driftmark in exchange for her support, or neutrality at the very least. If only the rest of his family were intelligent enough to see it. Aegon was supposed to look like an obvious choice, and instead, he spent his time whoring and drinking. Aemond seemed to perform any action with rage bubbling beneath, in a way that reminded Otto of Daemon far too much, and Durin was too young. Alicent leaned too much on the faith, hoping that the lords of the realm would discard Rhaenyra for her sins. Even after so much time, she still thought that nobles were as pious as she and her mother were. Otto's heart ached for a moment at the memory of his departed wife. No, this wasn't the time for sorrow. Now was the time for action. Much of his plans had hinged on Viserys' death. Grand Maester Melas had all but proclaimed that the king would not live past the next decade, at the most. Otto had made preparations, alliances, and moves, preparing for that, only for it to go up in smoke. He still did not know what Rhaenyra had told the king during her visit, but the man's sudden insistence on going to Dragonstone was beyond worrying. It wasn't until Larys Strong had brought him news of Dragonstone this very morning that he truly realized how much he had underestimated the situation. Where he first believed that his greatest fear was Rhaenyra's rising star and his plans lying in ruins, he realized how little of importance this was, with the realm itself being at stake. His thoughts were interrupted by Tywin Lannister finally entering the small council chambers. Grand Maester Melas still hadn't arrived, but they were late, and the man rarely contributed much during their meeting. It seems that Grand Maester Melas will join us at a later date. For now, let us proceed. I was approached by Lord Larys to arrange this meeting. So, why don't you start? The small council was far smaller than usual, with the Grand Maester, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, and of course, the King, not joining them. Lord Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin, looked uncomfortable as this would be the first session of the small council with the King's new condition. Perhaps, this can wait His Grace's return from Dragonstone. The Master of Whisperers spoke up in his soft tone, if there was another matter, then it would have perhaps been more prudent to wait, but this is an urgent matter, one that does involve the King's visit to Dragonstone and his miraculous discovery. And just like that, even the most dubious of them perked up in both caution and curiosity. Lord Larys continued, Lady Rhaenyra claimed that she had found the miraculous cure from a merchant who was staying in Dragonstone, a man who had traveled the world. King Viserys had been insistent on going to the island, presumably to thank the man himself. "Yes, we all know this," the Lannister man complained. "Yes, but I have received numerous accounts that the supposed merchant is a sorcerer, by the name of Harry Potter. I thought he was nothing but a charlatan, but there were too many accounts of unusual things occurring in Dragonstone, from many people, including a manse which appeared from thin air. It is also said that the day Princess Rhaenyra flew to King's Landing, the day when our king was healed, the sorcerer and his wife had broken their fast with her and her family earlier, having presumably gifted her the cure." There was a brief moment of silence, which lasted a few seconds, until the entire room erupted. When Larys had spoken to him of the news, he had been dubious but had believed him. There were rumors of the traveler being some sort of sorcerer, but he had assumed he was a charlatan who had found a cure to the king's illness. As for the miraculous recovery, perhaps it was something from their Valyrian heritage. There were rumors that a few Targaryens couldn't be burned, even by dragon fire, and a few that dreamed of future events. Otto had learned not to be surprised by their feats. Perhaps, healing wouldn't be out of question if the disease were purged. Unfortunately, now that he thought of it, magic was the most likely explanation of the king's miraculous recovery. He had thought the traveler to be a charlatan, a mummer, and yet, Larys was convinced that sorcery was involved. Otto did not trust the man, but he was reliable when it came to his information, which was why he had decided to hold a small council meeting, because it truly was worrying news. Sure, he wished to limit some of Rhaenyra's gain in reputation and make the council distrustful of her. And yet, he wasn't exactly worried by this. Rhaenyra was an impulsive woman, and she would make other mistakes. Daemon would likely help in that regard. No, the main issue was this Harry Potter's possible influence on the king. It was nothing, no green, or black, should be willing to risk, and from the council's reaction, they knew this as well. Otto had to admit that, while he did not trust Larys in any way, the man had a way with words, given that even Lord Beesbury looked appalled by the news. He raised his hand. "This is the small council, my lords. Upsetting news or not, you will conduct yourself with honor and dignity." With these few words, some of the most powerful men in the realm shrank in embarrassment. Thankfully, it was Tywin Lannister, the master of ships, who raised the main issue. "What I gather is that the king is currently on Dragonstone, and likely in the company of the sorcerer who arranged for his healing. And he likely did so, after being convinced by Princess Rhaenyra. Am I mistaken?" Lord Larys hummed. "I cannot say that I know of the king's conversation with the princess, but given the urge he felt on the trip, it is plausible." "This is troubling," Lord Jasper Wilde, the Master of Laws, commented. "Harry Potter. This is not an SSC name. Wasn't there a House Potter in the Reach?" "Yes," Otto replied, "a knightly house, who doesn't have a member with the name Harry, nor have they ever consorted with sorcery. I have advised the Tyrells to invite them to Highgarden if there are any connections between them and the sorcerer of Dragonstone." Lord Beesbury was the one to continue. "I must admit that a sorcerer having such influence over the king is worrying. Not since the times of Maegor the Cruel have we seen such influence." He was right, of course. Tyenna of the Tower's story was drenched in mysteries, but what was known was that she likely used her sorcery in her role as Mistress of Whisperers and was likely suspected of the deaths of many of Maegor's children and even a few of his wives. Magic was a foul practice, one that corrupted everyone involved and always ended with misery. There was a reason why it was condemned by the faith, after all. Lord Tywin Lannister was the one to follow up. "Lord Larys, you brought this to our attention. Do you have any news of the origins of this supposed sorcerer?" "I'm afraid not, my lords," Lord Larys answered. "I have made some inquiries, but the news is fresh, and this sorcerer must have hidden his origins well." Otto watched in satisfaction as they all came to the same conclusion as him. Rhaenyra wasn't some woman blessed by the gods. She had been manipulated by a sorcerer, likely hoping to integrate himself into the court, as a boon for saving the king's life. This was more than his feud with Daemon or the coming succession crisis. This was the very realm, the very crown, being under attack. Otto had all but ruled the realm for decades, and he could see a sorcerer in Viserys' favor, slowly tearing it away. The Seven Kingdoms were in danger, and their greatest protector, the king, was compromised. Otto would need to do what he always did and prepare to weather the storm. He couldn't risk his life's work being destroyed, not because of Rhaenyra's impulsiveness or Viserys' foolishness. He had to prepare the small council for the sorcerer's arrival and how to mitigate this. He had already written to his brother, and he would ask the citadel to find a way to combat this sorcerer. The doors of the small council chambers opened suddenly, revealing the Grand Maester entering slowly. "I apologize for my tardiness, my lords. I did not receive news of the meeting until it was too late." He walked forward and gave the hand a small scroll. Otto looked at it and saw his daughter's seal on it. While Larys briefed the Grand Maester on the news, he broke the seal and prepared to read the letter's contents. Otto had allowed Alicent to join Viserys, hoping that it would help him be informed of Rhaenyra and Daemon's moves. He had also sent her because she would have distracted the princess while he made moves in the capital. He regretted that now, especially with the sorcerer being involved. By the gods, he had even allowed Aegon to go there, as Helena had insisted on going for some reason, despite still recovering from the twins' birth, and it wouldn't have been proper for her to go without her husband. He was comforted that she was well, as she had given him the message, but his heart dropped as she confirmed the presence of a sorcerer. And yet, it was the end that truly made his hands shake. Whether it was in dread or in rage, he did not know. He was to be dismissed as Hand, again, and ordered to leave King's Landing, all because of a conversation between Viserys and the sorcerer that supposedly barely lasted minutes. He looked up and saw that the entire small council was staring at him. "Out," he spoke up calmly. They all looked at him with confusion, and he repeated himself loudly, this time, trying his best not to yell, "Everyone, out. Lord Larys, stay." The lords scattered like leaves before a storm, quick to obey, none willing to risk Otto's wrath, not in that moment, not when his silence felt more dangerous than any outburst. Otto did not speak at first. He merely reached into his sleeve and pulled out the letter, sealed in green wax and marked with the Queen's signet, and handed it to Larys Strong with a heavy hand and an unreadable expression. The Lord of Harrenhal took it delicately, unfolded it without ceremony, and read. His one good eye flicked across the page, absorbing its contents in silence. When he looked back up, his voice was soft, almost mournful. "A tragedy. The realm has never had a finer hand." Otto gave a sharp exhale through his nose. Whether it was agreement, bitterness, or simply exhaustion, he did not say. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, gaze fixed firmly on the crackling hearth nearby. "The future of the realm is more important. Magic has no place here, not in Westeros. It never has. It poisons, it corrupts, and it always ends the same way. In ash." Something flickered in Larry's eye at that, just for a heartbeat, and yet, he said gently, "It thrives. At Dragonstone." Otto didn't reply, but the Lord of Harrenhal immediately understood what he wished. Such unnatural problems will require unnatural measures. The hand didn't flinch. "And such measures. They can be found. Not easily, and not cheaply. But if one is willing to look eastward. Asai still trades in shadows. And some debts need not be spoken aloud." Otto leaned back in his chair, the firelight painting sharp lines across his face. He said nothing for a moment. "Get it done." Lord Larys bowed and left Otto alone in the small council, with his thoughts. He was making the correct choice for the realm. And, phew, that was a lot harder to write than I expected. I thought about jumping to Corlys and Rhaenys immediately, but I wanted to do something a bit new. I want to know what you think of my depiction of Otto. The idea was to have him be an ambitious man who had all but ruled the realm for years, and thinks that he deserves to have his blood on the throne, but regretted it after realizing that Viserys had all but ensured a succession crisis by sticking with Rhaenyra as his heir, and now, his entire family is at risk. He thought that Harry was a fake, or a lucky man with a cure, but now he knows that he's a sorcerer and is terrified of the influence, especially as he had successfully removed him as Hand, something that even Daemon couldn't do. As usual, please let me know what you think and if you have any suggestions.